If you can see it, you can be it. We hear that all the time. Well, for me, it's getting into schools, talking to students, for them seeing me in my role. This young man today, he said, "So what's your title again?" And I told him, I said, "I'm the director. There's 29 of us in Catholic boards in Ontario, 72 of us in all of them." And he said, "Well, how many are Black?" I said, "There's one Catholic that's Black, and there's 5 in the public system." And he said, "Wow." And I said, "You want to chat? Let me know. Swing by. We'll have a chat with the group." But addition isn't going to do it, because you're looking for people who aren't there. Are there more Black teachers in the Greater Toronto area? For sure there are. But there are more Black teachers, period, across education. And I think it's a good thing for education. And there are more racialized teachers. There are more teachers who are on the margins, period, and who would have been traditionally been on the margins, sorry. And I think it's a great thing for education, because more and more of our students are seeing people who represent them.
So unintentionally, this show has become a bit of a subtext of retired educators. I don't know where I'm at with the numbers so far, but it's a few people. And part of it, listen, I'm trying to interview our best leaders. And it just means that, generally speaking, leadership comes with experience and age. And so it skews towards those who are close to or have already retired. And so today's guest, Tyrone Dowling, is someone who is not retired yet, but that is his plan at the end of the year. And so we recorded this on Ash Wednesday, which is obviously significant, especially for Tyrone as a Catholic educator. And it's been a treat to get to know him. And interestingly enough, the way that I got to know him is the somewhat circuitous route through a recent conversation that I had with 2 of his colleagues, Katrina Gaudet and Whitney McKinley, who I interviewed in the fall around their work with AI. And Waterloo Catholic, where Tyrone serves as the director of education there, has garnered a pretty strong reputation for their work in generative AI. That said, all of the work that I've been doing and ALP's been doing around generative AI has not, up until this point, included Waterloo Catholic, but that will soon change. And so it was a great opportunity to connect with Tyrone. And listen, we share a love of golf. And so we've had a couple of conversations outside of this one where we talk pretty incessantly about our obsession with the game. We talk about a little bit here, but also talk about, I think, his vulnerability as a leader, as some of the mistakes that he's made and changes and things that he thinks we ought to do. And again, it goes in a direction I didn't really know that we would go to, which is always interesting to me. And even just exploring, Ontario has a number of high profile, you would say, Black educators. And so I was curious to know the trajectory of that in Ontario specifically, and how that's changed from when he began as an educator 30 years ago until today. So Tyrone is just a stand-up kind of guy, and I think has a well-deserved change of pace coming. But I know this is, as always, a really great conversation where you'll learn from Tyrone Dowling, Director of Education for Waterloo Catholic School Board in Ontario. So Tyrone, after 30-some years in this work, you decided it's time to try something different maybe, or what? So what kind of led to your decision to retire?
In Ontario, it's our best 5 makes up our pension. When I started this role, I was actually about 7.5 weeks away from my factor that I could have retired. I had said to my wife, I'd been in my previous role for a couple of months. When I went into that role, I said, best 5. My wife retired in June, and I started this role in September. And she said, are you still thinking best 5? I said, well, let's ride for 3, see how I'm feeling, see how you're doing, and let's have some conversation. And so that was pretty much it. We'd already set that as a benchmark and came up, and we started talking about it, and I said, I think I'm good.
And your wife?
Well, as I said, she's been retired for 3 years. So she's a teacher as well, and she's been doing it on her own. And we always said one of us would go first, figure it out for a few years. And right now, I think she's excited about me retiring, and I hope that he talked to her a year from September 1. She's still saying the same thing.
Well, listen, and knowing the role you have, she's going to be seeing a lot more of you than she has been, and you got to hope she's okay with that. She maybe says she is now, but all I know is like when I've been traveling a lot and I come home and I start moving stuff around the house, I get yelled at. Leave that there. She says, I run this place. I just pay rent here some days.
I show up part-time. The kids will, I'll walk in the door sometime and one of the kids will be at home for something or visiting and I'll say, wow, you're home early today, aren't you? And I'm like, wait a second, what, you don't even live here. You don't even get this. Yeah. She said, you're going to find something to do, right? And they said, I'll find a couple of things to do. 'Cause like you said, given this role, you can't just go from 100 miles an hour to 0. So we'll see. But I do want to just take some time and relax for a bit.
Yeah, and I think that's fair enough. And having talked to a fair number of people like yourself who have been retired now, there is that little bit of, all right, for a little while, I don't want to have to make any decisions. I want to just take an extended rest, vacation, sabbatical, whatever we're going to call it. But I also feel like somebody like yourself who has this wealth of experience and insights on a lot of things is there, without putting yourself in any kind of specific role, but like something you're thinking about that like at some point I may want to dive in, and is there a particular area that you think you would like to revisit in terms of supporting education, or maybe it's something completely different?
There are a number of things. Leadership, when I look around and I see the brain drain just because we've gotten old, but a number of us have been doing these roles for a bit. So from principal to superintendent and even into director, and people aren't sticking around as long. I know our superintendent of HR keeps on reminding our team, 2027 for us in Ontario, we're going to see a significant number of retirees, and we've seen it in our principal ranks. So just even as I visit schools, I'm having those leadership conversations, things that I think are just things that we should know, but our folks have been on the job so recently. So I think I'd enjoy something like, I love teaching and learning like that, assessment, the pedagogy, instruction. That's just a passion of mine. Somebody said to me, hey, do you want to sit and talk about how they teach principals to be better instructional leaders? I'd love to be involved in conversations like that. And then I look in our region, there's some work going on with the community safety and well-being plan. And they're looking for somebody. They've got a couple of folks, one from the region, one from our police force, that have full-time jobs that are making this plan happen, but it's like a second full-time job for both of them. So they're talking about hiring somebody to be able to run that, and somebody that's got some experience with governance and things like that. And I hear that, and I think I might be able to do that. I work with policy governance with our trustees. I get public sector. I get advocating and working with politicians, and it's talking about keeping the community safe. So I think that's something that I've recently learned that I have a passion for. So there's a few things out there, but it's just trying to figure out what's enough and what's too much.
Right. Yeah, no, and that's all part of the fun of it. But I think you're pointing to something that I think even we're both a similar vintage here and have a number. I'm in my 30 plus years now as well. And it's funny that how much more recently I've discovered, I do have some interest. It's not that I didn't know how to have talent or interest in certain areas, but you're so busy doing the work that you don't have that mindset of what can I give back in a different area. So it's interesting how that emerges, even though I'm sure other people could have told you that about yourself 10 years ago. Yeah, obviously this guy can do that, but you don't think of it yourself because you're doing the work. So
yeah. And the other thing is just in the brief conversations you and I had, you and I being of the same vintage, I remember in my first classroom job, dial-up internet. And the literal panic amongst my colleagues, me being the youngest person on staff, when I would go into the library, and it was an open concept school, built in the 70s. I was up in Waterloo, but from 1 to 7, they had classrooms around a sunken library. I can remember taking my class in there, and the entire school stopped because of the dial-up. And veteran teachers saying, that thing's dangerous. Like that internet thing, don't do it. Don't do stuff with your kids. Don't. And so I think about AI, and I think, well, wait a second. I literally lived through the dawn of the internet in education.
Yeah.
From the beginning of my career. So I wonder about the skill set that I have in leading our organization, and how do you plan for something like AI from an organizational perspective. And then obviously for me as a Catholic leader, what does it look like ethically in a faith-based system?
That's right. Yeah, no, and those are all really challenging questions that in the work that I'm doing, that I do really ask people to think back to other experiences. And while this is new, there's going to be new aspects of this that we haven't seen before. There are lessons that we've garnered over the years, or specifically to the example you shared and others, that I think veteran educators need to be able to feel confident to bring to the table. Oftentimes when new things come along, it's presented in a way, well, nobody has any idea what to do at this point. Well, that's not quite true. We have a wisdom and a set of experiences that we should be referencing and utilizing. Like that's an important part of our repertoire. But the thing about it is, you didn't really, even from what I've read, weren't really interested in even being a teacher. You come from a family of educators, but you resisted, in a sense, the family business. So how did that not end up being, how did your plans get swayed to actually join the family business?
You're bang on, and good research on you. I was going to law school. I thought for sure I was going to law school, and wrote the LSAT, had the application in hand, and was literally at the mailbox. with the application in hand, opened the mailbox and said, I don't know, man. I don't know if I can do school for that long. I don't know if I've got it in me. I just think I've got a few days. I just need to hold off on this. And then I don't know what happened to the application, but it never got put in the mailbox. And then I ended up, I can't remember, Dean, if it was just before or just after I was an unqualified supply teacher. And again, we talked about the internet and how things are cyclical. We're back to that in Ontario right now with some unqualified staff. I was an unqualified supply teacher, and I actually ended up teaching 3 courses at a high school. Unfortunately, a teacher passed away. I have been in for a short-term stint. Superintendent said, you're staying. You're going to stay for the rest of the semester. And I loved it. And I felt on education, we talk about that light bulb going on with the kids. I think the light bulb went on for me as well. When you just see that learning happen and realize it wasn't just you, but there was really a team effort. And I think most of my really powerful learning experiences have happened when it hasn't just been me with whoever I'm working with. And we've been able to create something where what we had before wasn't answering all of our questions or wasn't doing it for us. And so I'll never forget, because my stepdad was like, you're going to law school. This is great. Right. I'm an immigrant. So doctor, lawyer, engineer. We talk about this all the time. Kids of immigrants, we hear that often. And when my stepdad heard I wanted to go to law school, my mom was ecstatic. He was ecstatic. And I came home and I said, yeah, I don't know. And then, okay, what are you going to do? Well, I've got this supply teaching gig, so I'm going to do this. It's not like I'm not making money. You need to pay rent, whatever. And they didn't. But I said, you know what, I'm going to go teach college. And I didn't think that he could be proud, because he was pretty strict and had some pretty high expectations. He was prouder than I've ever seen him because I was going to teacher's college. Maybe it's because he felt like I didn't push. He finally just relented and he went into.
Yeah, that's interesting. And it's funny how you can see it all around you, but you've got to experience and get that affirmation yourself. And so you obviously found that. And similar for myself, in that I started as a journalist major, and it wasn't until I was doing a lot of work in our church with preschool kids, because I had preschool nephews that I just loved. I love little, and somebody said, you should be like, there's not a lot of males at that outlet. And it never even crossed my mind. And I love this. So for 7 years of my career, was a first grade teacher, and I loved it. And that's still always a passion of mine, is that early elementary. But yeah, that wasn't the plan going in. So it's funny how, and I think too, there's just something, I think there's a lot of pressure on young people today to figure out what you want to do at 18. And I just don't think that's fair. So I don't know, how do we help people, give them time to figure it out?
That's interesting you say that. I was just at our Ash Wednesday Mass, for our diocese, and I had a young man from up to me from another school district, actually Wellington, where I used to work. And his vice principal used to report directly to me, and she was a technology-enabled learning coordinator. And she and I had lots of conversations about leadership and discernment, and she was trying to figure out, should she stay or should she move into an administrative role? She decided to move into a VP job, and she loves it. And this young man came up to me, and it's a young black man, came up to me and he said, so you don't know me, but I know you. And I said, okay. And you've got to remember, there's a few hundred people in this facility today. You just came up today. And he said, so he named the vice principal. And I said, oh, okay. He said, she's talked to me a lot about you and those sorts of things. And I said, so what grade are you? And he said, 12. And I said, well, what are you thinking? He said, I'm going to go to uni. And I said, so what's the plan? What are you thinking? He said, psychology, apply to some school, I've gotten into some, away to year for some. And I said, well, do you have a plan for after that? And he said, I'm not sure. And I looked at him and I said, well, have you found what teaching? And he said, well, no, I haven't. And I said, well, why not? And he said, I'm not sure. I said, well, I'll tell you what, his director was actually across the aisle. And I said, do you know that man over there? And he said, I do. And I said, tell him or your VP, shoot me a text. You're 30 minutes away. I'm happy to whip down one day and have a chat. Just talk about teaching and why it might be a good fit for you. Because I've been talking to you for a couple of minutes, and I'm telling you right now, there aren't a lot of young people that would come up to me or a strange adult and just start a conversation and saying, I've heard about you, and I think you're the person. I think said, that's got teaching written all over it. I said, you're not afraid. We'd be afraid of our students, but you have a certain amount of confidence. You're very well spoken. It seems like you're pretty intelligent. And I said, and you're not shying away from attention. I said, you would be the markings of a great teacher, in my opinion. So think about it. And when you talk about students having to figure it out, one of the things that I found is we don't ask them, they don't think about it.
Yep. Yeah, no. And again, it's all about mentor. It's all about seeing what you don't see, all those kind of things. But you mentioned this is a young black man. So I wanted to ask you, like, when you think about your trajectory or just the trajectory of black educators, specifically in Ontario over the last 30 years of your career, like, how would you describe that? Because I feel, and again, as a white person from the West, we don't see as much. And I know in Ontario, there's much more of an emphasis on whether it's students or even educators and the black community. But tell me about the trajectory. Like, where do you see you've been and where are you now? How would you describe that?
For me personally, I'm at the pinnacle, right? I'm a director of education in Ontario. I know it's superintendent out west, but
yeah,
that's the pinnacle for a K-12 organization. A spot I never thought I'd see. Had some interest in it when I was younger, and then some things didn't break my way. So I thought, park that and just continue to be a principal and enjoy it because you love it. It's interesting you say that. So if I go back to the time that I came to Canada, I was 4, started kindergarten at 5. I didn't see a lot of other kids that looked like me. But interestingly, probably the most kids I saw that looked like me were in my kindergarten class at that school in a long time. It just so happened that there were a few other black kids there. The funnier part is that a few of them are teachers and were kids of teachers in our system. I would say that other than my stepdad, my mom who was an EA, their friends, I had the benefit of seeing those folks as educators, but I never had somebody who looked like me in front of me in a classroom. I have 3 kids who are all in their mid to late 20s. They've never seen anybody that looks like me or them as a teacher. We put all 4 of us together. That's over 45 years of educational experience in Ontario. Haven't seen it. But as I look at the region now, the region of Waterloo, the immigration have much more diverse. When I left to go to Wellington for a couple of years, I felt like I was in schools and very rarely did I see racialized students, whether they were black kids or otherwise. Came back after 2 years in Wellington and I was walking into schools thinking, like, where have I been? Immigration, migration from the GTA. Wow. Well, where are the educators? I would say that our educators are at a higher number than I've ever seen in my career. But just like this young man said to me today, I don't see any teachers that look like me. I don't see any teachers that look like you. Do I need to write a petition? We've got our Black Brilliance group. What do we need to do? And my point has always been those educators are sitting in our classrooms. Some of them are in our universities. They're definitely not in our teachers' colleges on large numbers. They're sitting in our classrooms. And that's why I said earlier, ask. And I know when I got hired to this job, one of the questions I was asked is, how are you going to increase the diversity of our staff? And I thought, well, I've had a good career. I'm eligible to retire soon, so I'm not going to answer the question, but I'm going to give them the answer I think. And And my answer was, you're asking the wrong question. Question is, how are we going to hire more? Because as I said, they're not in a university, they're not in our teachers' colleges, they're sitting in our classrooms. If you can see it, you can be it. We hear that all the time. Well, for me, it's getting into schools, talking to students. For them, seeing me in my role. This young man today, he said, so what's your title again? And I told him, I said, I'm the director. There's 29 of us in Catholic boards in Ontario, 72 of us in all of them. And he said, well, how many are Black? I said, there's one Catholic that's Black, and there's 5 in the public system. And he said, wow. And I said, you want to chat? Let me know. Swing by, we'll have a chat with the group. But addition isn't going to do it because you're looking for people who aren't there. Are there more Black teachers in the Greater Toronto area? For sure there are. But there are more Black teachers, period, across education. And I think it's a good thing for education. And there are more racialized teachers. There are more teachers who are on the margins, period, and who would have been traditionally been on the margins, And I think it's a great thing for education because more and more of our students are seeing people who represent them.
Well, and the other thing you bring up, Tyrone, that I've heard a few districts thinking of, and it's the bigger question, but it's specific to what you're saying, is like they're not entering into colleges of education. So how do we get that? How do we go further back to invite young people? And with a question, a continuing challenge of teacher shortage and so forth, some of the districts are thinking about how do we grow our own. So looking at going into grade 11 and 12 classes and saying identifying those kids like you just did with this young man, hey, have you ever thought about teaching? And so whether it's shoulder tapping a young Black girl or any other racialized or any kid to say you have this potential, and we as a district will support you in your journey, whether that's through some sort of financial scholarship, promise of internship or whatever. Those are some things that I don't think we've typically had to worry about in education, but I think we do now. And so I wonder about, it just makes me think, especially if we want more Black kids teaching and leading, we got to find them when they're not when they're 25 or 30. You got to find them when they're 16 or 15.
And Dean, I would say that you got to find them younger than that.
Maybe, yeah.
Because I think at 15 or 16,
they've maybe made up their mind
about what their experience has been with education and why they don't want to, or that they have something else. And so you raise a really interesting point. As a district, do we start to sponsor students? We've got a university here locally, Wilfrid Laurier, that has a faculty of education. They host a diversity event. And they asked for the 2 local school boards to send racialized students to this event, to this one-day event. I had a chance to go to the first one, and it is a little bit humorous because there was a gentleman there from my teacher's college class. And he's Pakistani, and he is now the director of equity for the Ontario Principals Council. And I knew he was going to be in town because he and I had stayed in touch, and he had said, hey, you don't have time to grab a coffee or lunch? I'm in town for something, blah, 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 blah. And I said, the idea's looking a little bit crazy. I walked into the room, and there he is. Well, the 2 of us were in the same teacher's college class, and who were the 2 racialized folks out of a class of 35 or 40 or whatever we were, right? And so I go into classes, and I say to kids all the time, the best one is when I'm in a young class, like a grade 3 class or grade 2. Who wants to be a teacher? There are very few grade 2 or 3 classes where the majority of the young girls in class don't put up their hand they want to be a teacher. So that's a bit of an easy one. I'm in a grade 6 class. There's a young Black man in there. He's a bit of a character. I like him right away. I'm drawn to him right away. He's something here. And I say to him, hey, what are you going to do when you're on? He says, I'm going to be a professional basketball player. I said, okay, what's your backup plan? He said, our league. I hate to break it to you, mate. Everybody needs a backup plan because it's happening. I said, have you ever thought about teaching? His classmates start laughing. He starts laughing. The teacher is taken aback. I said, well, you seem to like to be the center of attention. You're really well spoken, and I suspect if I look at your report card, I might see things that your grades are good, but your learning skills, you might need to focus a little bit more. And you like people. you're a great candidate to be a teacher. You're a great candidate to be a teacher. And in that moment, he stopped and he paused. And the principal said to me in the hall, I've never seen him go that quiet for that long. The teacher later said to the principal, and it got back to me, she had never thought about him in that way. And that solidified it for me, Guy. I need to start asking this question more often, because it's stopping not only our kids, but it's stopping our staff to start thinking about our kids different.
Right. Yeah. And you don't know, there could be kids who just, they can't even fathom the idea of being a teacher. It's so far out of reach for them, but they just might need somebody to just prompt them to say, you could do this. And I think that I'm a big fan of strength finder stuff and leading with strengths, appreciative inquiry, all that stuff, which I think most people buy into, but I don't think we do enough of it in schools where we identify and call that out in young people to say, did you know? The crazy thing, when I did some of that strength finder stuff about 10 years ago, I was surprised at things it told about me that I didn't even realize I am. Yeah, I have that strength. I didn't even know I had it. So how much shouldn't we be doing this with young people to help them identify those things early on? And of those strengths, many of them are going to have strengths that would be excellent for them to be teachers. So yeah, I think we're on to something here. So maybe that is your retirement gig, is figuring out a pathway to help young people think differently about this profession.
And it's interesting that you say that. I had nothing to do with it, but from that first conference that Laurier held, we got feedback about a young woman at one of our schools who had not been thinking about education, who was thinking about it, and a year later was in a concurrent program with the faculty.
Yeah.
You want a celebration in our hallway? We were celebrating. That was one kid from one day, a few hours off campus.
Well, and again, I know so I want to ask you a little bit about things to be being proud of and so forth from the district's perspective. And just so you know, Tyrone, you are not the first guest I've had on my podcast from Waterloo Catholic. And of course, you know that Katrina and Whitney have been leading a lot of work in AI and getting a lot of great recognitions, which they should. That's one area that I know that you're proud of and speak highly of. But when you think about the district as a whole, what kind of things make you proud of the Waterloo Catholic?
Listen, Dee, we've only got a limited amount of time, but I'm sitting in my office and I can literally picture each of the superintendents' offices down the hall behind where I'm facing right now. And I can tell you about something that's going on for every single portfolio that I think we're doing some great work. So you talked about AI. Think about our communications manager and the work she's done with just our branding. And she's doing some work to move us away from X into other platforms. And we know there's been a lot of conversation around X. He's done some really great work with her team about, it's not as simple as just shutting down X and moving elsewhere, because we've got people who need to get information about us and are following us. And look at some of the work we're doing in numeracy and elementary and secondary. Our research department has done some unbelievable work with our multi-year strategic plan and being able to put a dashboard that's forward-facing on our website and 30 indicators on that. Every month, if there's new information, it's updated for the public to see, say, here's what our goal was, that we were going to see this much of a percentage increase in something or this. It's right there for everybody to see. It doesn't have to be just, you have to show up for a board of trustees meeting. Back to numeracy, because I touched on the research department. Our numeracy department, our research department have put together EQAO, Education Quality and Accountability Officers, grade 3, 6, 9, and 10 assessments in the province of Ontario. For grade 3 and 6, and it's all gone to an e-assessment recently. We put together a mock EQAO for math. Unbelievable cutting edge stuff that has been able to, our kids are just finishing up in the next couple of weeks in grade 3 and 6. And our teachers are going to get those reports back following our spring break, which is next week, to see how their students are doing. And it's going to give them some areas that they may need to continue to focus on ahead of them writing it in May. Some of the work that's been done in literacy with our literacy superior as a response to the right to the read that came out of human rights. In special education, we've got a protocol with our multilingual learners so that students who are coming to us from different countries who are speaking multiple languages aren't being classified as special education student erroneously. And so we're trying to figure out, is this really a special education issue or is this a multilingual learner issue? And so we've been able to put a protocol. And I remember my first year as a principal in 1990, I was having that conversation with my ESL teacher and my grade 8 teacher at the same time about this. And we look at all these years later, we've been able to do that. Look at our secondary, our experiential learning. Ontario has a youth apprenticeship program. Some of the work we've been able to do there, I know we're a leader in the province in that. E-learning, there's a requirement for e-learning courses in the province of Ontario now. Our team's done a great job on that. We have a CanEd program that is, for our size of our board, completely outstanding. HR is doing some real work around staff wellness and trying to track and hear from our staff. How are they doing? Right. And then we have hard data. It's not always easy to look at, but we have to respond to it. And then I look at our equity work across the system that's interconnected to our faith. And so we're a Catholic organization, so faith didn't have it first because I was going down to each office, but faith, we lead with faith and equity. They go hand in hand. And then now finally, I look at our corporate services, our business, our facilities, our IT, the work that they're doing. We're a growing district. So the work that our facilities team is doing to maintain our facility and plan for new builds. So we had a new school open last year, 2 opening in September, 2 more the following September, with other additions happening. Like we're growing leaps and bounds. And then that corporate services to keep all that, the figure straight, to be able to get us to a balanced budget. And then cybersecurity and the work that our IT department's doing to keep us safe, because we know a hack's coming and we're just trying to minimize it. I know that's a lot, Dean, but I could go into detail about all, but it's really easy to sit in my seat when you've got a team like that are literally rocking it out of the park in every portfolio.
Well, there's 2 things. It speaks highly, obviously, of your team and your district, but it also speaks highly of you that you're calling those things out, you're seeing them, acknowledging them, because education and teaching and learning can very easily fall into a deficit mindset where we're looking at all the problems we have and we're trying to solve them, of which there are many. I know you're not suggesting there aren't any problems, and I want to ask you about that in a second, but I think saying that, listen, we need to do a better job of calling out the really good things are happening, because I think people like yourself see that every day. Like you're just looking at, and again, I'm so blessed. All the districts I work with, like I meet people like you and others in leadership, and I'm going like, education has just so many high quality people doing really good work. And I don't think the public is as fully aware of it as they ought to be. So you talked about your communications team, which I know that's part of their job, is to tell the story of the amazing things and building that trust with your community and social capital. So again, kudos to you and the district. But I want to just ask a little bit about leadership is yes, it has lots of awesome and great things which you've called out, being able to participate in and see and lead. But what about a challenge? I don't know if you're looking back and you can think of something, and maybe it's something that's happened recently, maybe it's something in the past, but just a challenge that you think about often in terms of what it taught you. And it could be maybe something that you didn't do well that you had to overcome, or just something that was presented to you that you weren't quite sure how you're going to get through it, but you come out the other end and think about that as something that was really seminal in your own development as a leader.
Wow, that's a great question. I spoke earlier about that instruction and assessment piece and how that is a personal passion of mine. I would say in my leadership journey, one of the things, I think back to one of my schools that I was fortunate enough to be the principal at. I walked into a school that had a solid reputation, really solid academic scores, an unbelievable parent community, and was a pretty comfortable SES community. And I said to my superintendent at the time, what am I here for? Place is running. Like, what am I going to do? And she said, I need you just to scratch a little bit below the surface, see. And one of the things that I discovered was kids and the families were so strong that it didn't always matter what we did in our practice, that the students were going to be successful. And so the question I asked, and this is the learning for me because I didn't ask it the right way, was, are our students successful because of us and things that we're doing, or are they successful just because they're going to be successful? And if it has nothing to do with us, I think we need to look at ourselves, and we're going to have to change some practices. And we did need to change some practices. And one of the big learnings for me was the way that I went about it. Because as I started to scratch that a little bit as a superintendent, it encouraged me, I realized our practices weren't where I thought they should be. They weren't as current. We were relying on the students' life experiences, their skill sets, and the parental support to say to students, you're just going to do this because the teacher said. And my question was, in Ontario, we're a 4-level system. And so I said, everybody scores at level 3 on EQAO. My question was, what about the level 4s? Are we asking level 4 questions? We've got a large number in ILOB. So I examined the data. We had a large number of students at level 2. And I said, what would happen if we moved these students from 2 to 4? Again, worrying for me, veteran staff. There weren't a lot of people that were happy with me. And so I had to backtrack because when I started to look at the data, I realized, wait a second, there are too many kids here that are sitting at level 2 that could be at level 3 or more. So if we move the 2s to 3 and the 3s to 4, so that's why I said the 2s to 4, how can we do it? I ended up working with a staffer from EQAO who was one of our principals on secondment and posed that question. She said, I think, Tyrone, you have a great question. And we spent a couple of years at it, DU. And the end of it was some staff weren't happy. They may have decided to move on or they may have gotten on board, but I had to figure out ways to communicate them that was honest with them, affirming what they were doing, but also saying we're going to get in. At the beginning of it, I don't know that I had that affirmation piece. And I don't know that I communicated that the move was not personal move. It was, we're going to move because this is right for kids. And so I learned how to take that data and communicate it to staff in a way that I hope was less off-putting to the majority of them. And by the end of it, our school staff was recognized provincially with an award from EQAO, which was a big deal. But what was really big in my mind was we took a look at some data and we took a look at what we were seeing in front of us. And although the two matched, they didn't really match, came up with a plan and we put the work in, we were able to do it. My big learning was, how do you communicate that to your staff and how do you bring them along without pushing or pulling too much?
Well, and I think I appreciate that story because I think that's a pretty common challenge in education where you see a goal that you want to achieve, but you also have to work with the people that are going to help you get there. And the fact that you recognize, and I think a lot of us do after the fact, that I probably could have handled that differently or I didn't address that. That's part of learning, right? That's just, there's nothing but a good thing about recognizing that. But I also think education comes with a unique challenge because unlike you, if you're working in the corporate world and these people are serving under you, you have a little bit more of a authority to I'll just tell these what to do. But teachers are professionals. They have a level of autonomy. We want them to have a level of autonomy. We want them to feel that. And so you're not leading in always in this purely hierarchical framework. It's a little bit more horizontal in your leadership, but you're still leading. So I think you're addressing what is probably a complex problem that there's no easy solution to. That, like, how do you help people move forward in a way that affirms what they've already done, challenges their thinking, allows them to remain relatively autonomous in their work, but you have a common goal that you're working towards. And you can write that on paper very easily, but you're dealing with human beings that have different personalities and your level of relation with each of them is different. And so navigating all that stuff there's a real art and a science to that. You talk about data, the science part, but there's a real art to this as well.
It's interesting you say that. So two things. When you talk about allowing that autonomy, the other piece that I learned was the empowerment. Because with that autonomy comes empowerment.
Right.
And the things that teachers were able to take from our conversations and our work was mind-boggling. Things that I would have never considered. And then as they were empowered to really assist their colleagues and have their colleagues become intrigued by what they were doing and what they were seeing the result. And then at that point, Dean, it becomes like wildfire.
Yeah. You can get out of the way at that point. Like your job is not to say it's done, but it's a lot of it. You got it going, and now let them go.
Go on, but now it's just keeping it in between the rails and just
Yeah.
right. And
Yeah.
and so I think the biggest thing that I learned out of that was to become a leader who questions. And
Yeah.
through that questioning, as I've said to people who have been new to teams with me, when I question, it's not because I don't you or I don't trust you. It's because I'm trying to provoke the thinking in you to see where you think it needs to go. You're in that space. You're the expert. And so like
Mhm.
the learning that led to this helps in this role is I have to stay in a lane that is not in each of those portfolios I just described.
Yeah.
In my perspective, I can't be the micromanager. I have to let people do their things, but I have to have an understanding of what they're doing enough to be able to ask questions and learn. And that
Yeah.
has been the biggest reward for me, is having those conversations with people, learning from them, and then seeing that light bulb that I spoke about when I got into teaching continue to turn on for both them and myself as we continue to have those conversations.
So that makes me, my next question is I mean, maybe you've touched on it a bit, and maybe it's that or something different, but what advice would you give to a young person? We talked about encouraging young people to even consider teaching, but what about those folks who already started their careers, but are thinking about maybe a leadership career? So maybe they want to become a principal, or they work at the board office, or maybe they're aspiring to be in your position someday. What advice would you give that young person who's thinking about that?
Well, first off, I hope they're thinking of this job because I say to an awful lot of new people, I'm just keeping the seat warm. I think my advice, Dean, would be to ask questions and then listen. That would be one. Two would be always picture yourself before you ask the question. Picture yourself on the other side of the desk and how would you answer it? So I'm giving you that formal educational hierarchy. So from teacher to principal to superintendent to director. But I think it also works on the corporate side of the desk or the corporate side of the house. If I'm in HR and I'm an officer in HR and I'm talking to my manager who has to report to the superintendent, I'm thinking about me and a manager, ask the question and listen. But before I ask the question, I should be thinking about what I would say if I was in that role. I learned that way back in a principal's qualification course. Don't ask a question you're not prepared to hear the answer to, or you don't have an idea as to what the answer is going to be. Because I think as a young person, if you're thinking about what it could be, what you hear is going to help you frame your next steps in that situation and in leadership.
Yeah, I'm picking up on especially what you first said is that notion of curiosity. I think it's there's such a richness and authenticity there that I'm genuinely curious. I don't know HR, but I have a question about this, right? Just a good example of just genuinely curiosity. I think that there's a common trait I see in educational leaders that are successful is that they're genuinely curious. They just want to know. I don't have all the answers, but I want to ask. And in that asking, I'm provoking you to perhaps think about something maybe you haven't thought of, or maybe you haven't articulated. And I think that's such a foundational.
And when we talk about me getting ready for retirement, I always said, if I know all the answers, it's time for me to get out. I'm further away from the answers now than when I started, right? Because
Yeah.
And I'm probably far more curious, but I'm old and I'm tired too.
Yeah. Well, and listen, that's the same thing with me with the AI stuff. Because I said, I'm just curious. There's so many questions, more questions than I have possible answers to. It's why I think doing this in community and with other people, and like you said that before about like the enjoyment that you had when you did something together as opposed to just yourself. And that's the part of this work that has been so enriching for me. So last kind of serious question, and we'll wrap up with a little more fun stuff, is I want you think back to something way back in your early days. It could be something that happened yesterday, today, maybe somebody did something for you, but I want you to, and I'm going to preface this by saying, I know this is a hard question. I know there's a million people you could think of, but I want you just to name one person today that you're grateful for in education. And then you get bonus points if it's somebody that might actually listen to this. That doesn't have to be that way. It could be somebody, because some people just have somebody in their mind, but that just gives you bonus points. But anyway, so one person that you're grateful for?
So it's interesting. You're right. It's a hard question. And there are a number of people that I'm standing on the shoulders of to get to this role. And I would love to say a member of adults. My mom and my grandmother come to mind, but I've got to pick my office team. And the picture in my office is of a young Black man with his hands crossed behind his back, facing a wall. And around him are words like the N-word, filthy, dog, lab, able, sorry about that, and then the B word. And it's a piece of art that a young man that I worked with, they were doing an art project, and the project was tell us, do a self-portrait, a paragraph to describe why this is you. Because this young man had written the words, it came to my desk, and going to be the first public showing, the first public gathering at this school post-COVID. And people were very concerned that there were going to be some young people in the gallery that were going to see this, or grandparents. How is this going to play out? And I remember saying to the principal, who was a white man, who said, what do we do with this? And I said, talk to the parents. What are the parents? The parents are okay with this being out, then you put it out there. Principal phoned me back, and he said, Tyrone had the meeting, myself, the teacher, the young man's dad came in. The young man explained the words, explained the self-portrait, and said to his dad, there's a newcomer to Canada. He said, I have a brother who's JK. These are all the words I've been called since I've been here in Canada. And I don't want that to ever have to happen. If I think of one person, that young man that had the courage to put this together, had the confidence to speak to his father and school staff. Principal called me, he said, Tyrone, but there wasn't a dry eye on the roof. Just getting choked up thinking about it. Yeah. I'd met the young man. Somebody took the picture. They asked him permission, and they gave me a copy of it. And it hangs just above my monitor here because it's a reminder to me of why I come to work.
Yeah, no, that's a powerful story. I think I don't know that I've had anybody answer that question by talking about a student, but I mean, that when you hear that sort of puts the things in perspective, and you probably don't go too many days in your office without staring at that picture and getting reminded of like, oh yeah, we got work to do here, people. We got work to do, and good of powerful of a young man to be brave enough to do that. Thank you for that. All right, home stretch here. The big question is, what are your new expectations for your golf game?
Well,
Scott,
I was at the simulator last week and it was horrible. We've got spring break coming up next week. And I just said to my wife, a friend of mine backed out. I said, I'm still going. I've got to finish a couple of games and I got to practice on a few things. I really just want to continue to work on that bogey golf game, right? Just trying to make sure that I'm getting in there. And that short game for me is that approach shot and the short game, right? Getting that approach shot a little bit closer to target and getting that short game dialed into the stick. I can do it. I can do it on the sim within 8 feet. I can do it outdoors.
Yeah. No, I'm with you. That's where I know it's got to be. I'm not going to hit the ball any farther than I hit it. So that's I'm not worried about that. But I got to clean up a little bit. That'll give me hope. So anyway, hopefully one day you and I can compare notes and see where we're at. As far as reading, I know you're still curious, you're still learning. Or is there anything that you're reading or listening to for professional growth at the moment?
For professional growth, I tend to just read articles. Somebody just gave me or turned it around to see it. It was our Leaders and Learners, Canadian national publication, and it was on, I have it here. It's called Bridging the Gap from Big Box to Bespoke Professional Learning to Supportive School and Improvement. And so I'm having a conversation with one of our superintendents about this right now. She's doing some work with her family at school. I tend to read a lot of articles in educational leadership and things like that. From a podcast perspective, I try to keep up with Katrina and Whitney with our AI podcast, but I'm way behind on that because can't do it and do something else like most of my other podcasts. Most of my other podcasts, I can multitask. That one,
yes, right. But you got to hold it. I get it. But then the next question is, these are things that you could multitask for. I don't know if you have any. What's your brain break, getaway, slightly trashy, maybe even binge watching thing that you're just like, okay, when I just want to shut the brain off for a bit, this is my go-to. You got to go to in that category.
Sure. I like to binge stuff, not reality show, but I guess they are reality shows. Drive to Survive on Netflix.
Yeah.
Full Swing, quarterback, receivers, anything to do with sports, sports guy. I love college sports. So I know that one of our VPs just told me about our book about the state of today's college football game. Actually, no, the name of it. It slipped my mind. He was just finishing it up a couple weeks ago. So I'm going to have to send him an email after this to say, hey, I'm going to have some time in my hands. What's the name of that book?
Yeah, no, I haven't watched this year. Like Full Swing season 3 came out, I think, last week. I haven't started that one yet, so that's on my list. But I was going to ask you, because I watched quarterbacks and then I started watching receivers. I didn't like receivers as much as quarterbacks. I felt like they didn't get into the technically the X's and O's. Like I thought quarterback was a better series than receivers, but that was just me.
Well, it's interesting because I don't think either of them got into the X's and O's. But you know who in my house who really liked both of them was my wife.
Oh, interesting.
And she's not like she'll watch the Super Bowl. She'll come to she's a former basketball coach. She'll come to basketball games like NCAA's on right now. We're watching every game we can get our hands on, and then we realize we should probably be going to bed. But she really liked both of those shows.
Yeah, they take you obviously behind the scenes or families. I guess with quarterback, what I liked about it is like you really understood, okay, these guys, they're not just good athletes. Like they are working their butts off to stay on top of the learning that goes with that position. And I don't know if it was because I think in receivers, there's a couple of them were injured, so they weren't quite as active in it as they might have been. But I just thought in terms of understanding what it took to maintain their craft, especially at that quarterback position, it was like, okay, this is like a crazy amount of work to be good at this job. It's not just your talent.
When you say that, I'm a Raiders fan. So when Devontae Adams was on receivers, watching him as he's not young anymore, but he's still a top tier receiver, and watching the work that he put in, I would say the same thing about that. Like that receiver that I really took the most away from in terms of his work ethic.
Yeah, no, competition is so high. That's just fascinating. But yeah, I'm all in on any of those kind of shows as well. All right, last question. Kitchener-Waterloo, really happening area, but so if I'm going to come there for whatever, a day, a couple days, give me besides the golf course, which I hope we get to, but besides that, what would be whether it's a restaurant, a park, any other kind of space that is maybe a bit of a hidden gem of, oh, you should check this out, one of your kind of maybe go-to spots in the region?
So I would say if you can get on the Grand River, there's a company that runs canoes. We have kayaks. We live less than a kilometer away. My wife doesn't like it when I do it because you might be able to tell I'm a little bit tightly wrapped. She says it's about the journey, not the destination. I'm about the destination. Like how fast can I get from point A to point B? Did I beat my last time? But off at river, you get to see a whole different side of this community that you don't know. Our house is literally 800 meters away from the river. And we live just off of major thoroughfare that is super busy. And 500 meters from there, you don't even know that thoroughfare is there.
Lovely.
I would say that's a hidden gem that people don't get a chance to. And there's trails as well. We have a pair of dogs, so whenever I can, I'm walking the dogs along the river. That's just a peaceful spot for me.
Excellent. I like it. I definitely will think of that. Well, Tyrone, it's been a pleasure. I want to congratulate you, first of all, on an outstanding career. So many things that you're going to be thinking about in the next few months as you put a bow on everything. But I want to thank you for your time today. This was great to get to know you, and I hope we can continue to learn with and from each other, no matter where we are in the future days here.
Well, thanks for having me. Hopefully I've been able to give you something that's useful. And for any of your listeners, I haven't bored them to death. But yeah, I'm looking forward to that golf game.
All right. Cheers.
Take care.